It is a day of darkness and desolation from the galaxy, a time of turmoil and war. Darth Vader, the newly christened Dark Lord of the Sith, had won the duel on Mustafar and become Darth Sidious's apprentice, the most indomitable master the dark side had ever seen. The Rebel Alliance had been decimated effortlessly, and both Luke and Leia Skywalker, his own children, were dead by his hand. As Sidious had plotted and schemed for decades in the shadows, his dream of realizing a dark empire that would stand for 10,000 years had finally come into fruition, with the construction of the Death Star and other tactical superweapons being plotted in the unknown regions, allowing the Sith reign to reign unchallenged. In addition, his studies into the ancient texts of Korriban had granted him the ability to transfer his consciousness into a younger clone body, allowing his previously unimaginable speed in lightsaber combat to be almost inconceivable, further expanding his powers to unconceivable heights. One day, while attending a massive military parade on his resort world of Biss, the reborn clone Palpatine and his own apprentice Vader are suddenly transported back in time to the Old Republic era with the legendary Emperor of the Sith, Valkorion, which is to test his power against his so-called greatest Sith of all time. He has perceived the future, knows that Sidious will become a greater master of the dark side than perhaps anyone before him, even him, and wishes to prove his superiority once and for all and supplant him. Valkorion reigns over the galaxy with an iron fist, commanding the Eternal Throne and the Eternal Fleet effortlessly. Determined to topple his throne no matter what, after deducing his Force signature is even more powerful than his own, Palpatine summons what remains of his Imperial forces for a large-ditch effort and offensive at the Zakulian system, where he himself would confront the Eternal Emperor alone, the fate of the galaxy as it lands. The cackle of Darth Sidious was like black nails scraping over concrete, an ancient door creaking back and forth. Valkorion stood on the steps of the Eternal Throne, surveying the carnage that lay before him. Dozens of dead Zakulian warriors and knights of Zakul, the lifeless corpses of his twin sons and daughters, Valen, Arcan, and Thexan, organs and entrails strewn around. The walkway had partially collapsed. Fragments of stone littered the floor, and thick smoke was billowing throughout the entire chamber like a storm cloud. The shadow that stood before him was a nexus of dark energy, darkness beyond darkness, an inconceivable shadow, a literal black hole in the force that consumed everything in its path with its insatiable rage. Never before had the Eternal Emperor faced such an enemy before. His own darkness, his own pure malicious spirit, threatened to cave in the force of his power. One whose power who matched or possibly exceeded even his own. Sidious flexed his wrist. From his right hand, a spear of scarlet flame lanced free. In response, Valkorion subconsciously summoned a force pike from one of the dead Zakulian guards as well. He knew it was no match for the Sith if he opted to use a lightsaber, but he might be able to temporarily incapacitate his opponent with the Force, and then move in for a swift kill. Only if he played his cards right. Sidious raised his blade, the crimson fork dividing his fate. Instantly, Valkorion jumped back and unleashed a brilliant storm of force lightning that arced throughout the corridor, singeing the walls and causing coils of smoke to twist through the air. He hit Sidious directly and sent the Sith Lord flying into the opposite direction, its robes billowing out before him as smoke leered and coiled from his build. Faster than the normal eye could perceive, Valkorion leapt forth using force augmentation and plunged the force pike into Sidious's chest. But the fallen Sith Lord was able to recover in time and intercepted the attack with his lightsaber. The Zakulian pike simply worthless and was cut like butter through the wrath of the Crimson Blade. A precise flick of Sidious's blade cleaved the force pike in half. Valkorion staggered back, blinking in surprise, a brief second of hesitation. The two Sith Lords locked eyes, and the Force exploded as the two most powerful masters of the Force and Darkseid in all of galactic history clashed in a titanic duel of epic proportions. Sidious unleashed a Force lightning storm of his own that barely missed cleaving Valkorion in two, but Valkorion fended it off completely by hurling the crackly beams of energy back to its source, more powerful and potent than Sidious's. Darkseid beasts appeared under Valkorion's command, their eyes of blazing crimson, and their faces malformed and distraught. They were autonomized instantly by Sidious's force waves, leaving nothing but ruin and decimation in their wake. The twin emperors unleashed deadly telepathic assaults on each other with enough power to decimate the minds of millions of people. The planet shook, the stars appeared to dim, and the never-ending void of space seemed to expand and surround them, encompassing the entire throne. It was clear that neither side was winning. They were locked in an eternal struggle. Valkorion stepped back, summoned a protective force shield around him, and then made a dragging gesture with his hand. Huge chunks of debris was mustered from the space of the station's ceiling, ripping apart most of the walkway. Dripping stone, Sidious ceased his attacks, and instead of dodging, he caught one with the force and began to rotate it, manipulating it in midair, imbuing it with the force, and then redirected it at his opponent. Almost at the same time, he opened his mouth and let out a blood-curdling scream. The metal pillars around supporting the station began to bend and crack. Valkorion's knees buckled, forcing him to kneel on the floor. Disoriented, he barely had time to comprehend what was going on before the deadly projectile hit him, exploding with the force of a dozen proton torpedoes. Sidious crossed his arms in front of his chest, raising his own shield just in time to shield himself from the blast. As the smoke cleared, he could see the half-burned remains of the Eternal Throne, but Valkorion was nowhere in sight. Sidious frowned. Where was his adversary? His immaculate white armor now charred and damaged, littered with black spots, blood trickling out of his eyes like a waterfall. The Eternal Emperor had managed to teleport at the very last moment, and now took refuge behind the throne. Sidious's force bellow had taken him by surprise, and as a result, he had taken the full force of the explosion. Valkorion struggled, barely able to stand up as he clutched the massive gaping wound in his chest. Sidious had bested him. Impossible! He couldn't fathom how this had happened. He was supposed to be the most powerful being the galaxy had ever or would ever see, but here he was, looking against a mere pretender who wanted to claim his throne. Groaning in agony, he reached for his comlink. He was going to show this terrible mistake of a Sith Lord who's boss, because there can and will only be one Sith Emperor in the galaxy, and it certainly wouldn't be Sidious. Mustering his hologram, he issued quick orders. Sidious approached his fallen foe, finally deducing where he was, his lightsaber clutched in his grasp. He couldn't help but stifle a smile as he saw the barely conscious form of what was once the feared, proud leader of the Eternal Empire. Coward, he spat. You claim yourself to be the Sith Emperor, but you are still no match at the power of the dark side. You are pathetic, Valkorion. You wrought shame upon all of us, and I will not let this insult stand. The blade came up, emitting crimson fire, pointed at Valkorion's neck, poised to strike. Valkorion smirked, his malformed face, ignoring the pain that continued to ripple through his body. You are mistaken. I am no Sith. I transcend both light and dark, Sith and Jedi. My boundaries are limitless. Sidious grinned maliciously. We shall see. He raised the blade, ready to decapitate his fallen foe at any moment. And there was suddenly a reeling as the Eternal Fleet opened fire. Hundreds of warships unleashed their turbo lasers, painting the night void with pure green energy, all concentrated on a single target. Valkorion took this opportunity of brief hesitation and launched the most deadly force power he mustered. He channeled his pain and fury to unleash a death field, the Nathemic Ritual, the very same technique he had used to eliminate all the life on the planet Zyos and Nathema way back a millennia prior. It hid Sidious, withering his young features, mummifying his physique. The colour drained out of his face. His eyes became wrinkled black husks, and he fell to the floor, his corpse and life finally ebbing from him as his dark spirit cackled in the night. He dropped his lightsaber. He fell back, sprawled on the floor, heavily wounded, dead, unable to summon a shield. As the ships above continued their relentless attack, Valkorion grinned. Triumph was on his side. Talking is your greatest talent, but it is time where I teach you to listen. With a flick of his wrist, he activated Sidious's lightsaber. He could briefly detect raspy breaths as the Sith Lord's spirit failed to die. He felt the spirit lingering around as a dark presence on the world. He wanted to perform essence transfer. He was scouring the nearby area for any form of body or any form of consciousness. The red blade impaled Sidious, carving a neat hole in his stomach. Sidious yelped in pain, his spiritual eyes perceived in the darkness. Valkorion beamed at his friend, lightning rippling off him as Sidious's spirit exploded. His yellow eyes conveyed hatred and surprise before being devoured by the darkness. He thought about summoning a force storm on his corpse to truly end this once and for all. His entire body glowed with a dark purplish energy as he had tried to lash out one last time, but he couldn't. Sidious knew the life was draining out of him. He felt death embrace him, and he fell still as the night consumed him. The 501st Legion, led by Darth Vader, boarded the space station. They were astonished by the sight that lay before him. The throne was utterly devastated. Fragments of flesh, metal, debris, and corpses were scattered everywhere. And most of all, the centerpiece of the entire fiasco. Their emperor lay on the steps of the Eternal Throne, his eyes wide but lifeless. There was an enormous hole caved in his stomach. His features were once again gruesome and ugly, no longer what he had looked like when he came out fresh of the cloning vat. And there was Valkorion himself, sitting on the remains of the throne, his body barely breathing as he clung to life, his pure Nethemic ritual, only thing that allowed him to stay alive, a huge pool of blood leaking down before him. Apparently this emperor had eventually succumbed to his own injuries, while reveling in his moment of triumph against the most powerful foe he had faced. Darth Vader detected a raspy breath emerge from his throat and trotted over to him. He ignited his crimson saber and decapitated the Eternal Emperor, his head bobbing down onto the floor as blood spilled from his neck. Vader smirked. His plan to pit the two Sith Emperors against one another had worked to perfection. As expected, both wouldn't walk out alive. The Eternal Throne would be his for the taking. Vader had also alone made preparations to destroy any cloned body that the Emperor still had in reserve, lest he should ever come back again and attempt to ignite his fire across the galaxy again. Meanwhile, he was the new owner of the Eternal Throne. The Eternal Fleet should exercise his rule. If they don't, the Imperial forces led by Grand Admiral Thrawn would either take control of the fleet or obliterate them. Many super weapons had been brought into the Zakuul system to help finish the job, including the Death Stars, the Galaxy Gun, the Eclipse, Eye of Palpatine, the Sun Crusher, and a variety of Imperial mechanical marvels that he could muster. He stepped forward, kicking aside the corpse of his former master, and incinerated Valkorion with a single burst of Sith lightning. He sat comfortably on his throne, gazing out into the battle that was unfolding within the empty abyss of space.